Hey there everyone, welcome back to the Dan Cave and welcome to part 2 of the 124th Fujimi Ford GT40 from Le Mans 1966. So it's been a few weeks. Unfortunately, just due to work, I've not been able to get any real bench time. I've been away for 2 weeks in the US and Canada with work. Just got back just before the weekend. So finally back in the bench, finally got some time. I thought it was time to get part 2 out because it's been a while since part 1 was out and that was the last video that was out. So hopefully over the next few days and week there'll be 2 videos. There'll be part 2 followed up by a bench review, and then hopefully quickly afterwards part 3 as well before I go away on my next work trip. So yeah, it's been pretty busy. So as ever, part 2. Part 1 got the bodywork prepped, primed, painted, deckled, clear coated. Part 2 is going to be a relatively short video, diving in and getting kind of the chassis and the interior done. So things like the kind of basic chassis itself, the interior tub, dashboard, seat, etc. So all that's in part 2, and then part 3 will pick up with the conclusion, hopefully in a couple of weeks' time. So there we go. So I'm not going to hang around for too long. Let's dive on in and let's see how this build went together in part 2. I'll see you at the end for some final thoughts. So it's straight into the chassis work today. So we've got the 2 main chassis parts. They're just held together at the moment. And it's the usual kind of cleanup. So starting with just cleaning up the sprue attachment points, and then dive in with a variety of UMP thinny sticks just to clean up those edges. So fairly straightforward work. All the ancillary parts do exactly the same, clean up any seam lines, any edges. And then it's a case of getting all those parts then mounted for priming. So as you can see, I'm cleaning up all the interior parts as well. Once that's all done, they're all mounted and it's off to the spray booth to start the priming process. So the majority of the kind of chassis on this is going to be in UMP black primer, probably just be left in UMP black primer. Could go over it again with a semi-gloss black, but I think I've decided to just leave it in the UMP black, because it does have a little bit of a sheen to it and seems to come out all right for what I need, and particularly for something that's, we'll say, on the underside of the kit. It's not going to be a highly visible area. For the interior tub, again, it's not highly visible on the kit, so just leaving it in the UMP black primer is absolutely fine. So all these parts get a couple of coats of UMP black, which lays down very nicely through the UMP apex. So while I'm, of course, prepping and priming all the kind of running gear and chassis parts, also priming any of the engine parts, which we'll come back to in part 3. Now there is a fire extinguisher bottle for the interior, so that's going to be primed in white. So once I'm happy with all that priming, it's had some time to dry. Going to mask up some of the chassis area for some additional colouring to go down. So it's the usual masking process, using Tamiya masking tape, detacked, and then some kip tape as well, which is very, very similar to Tamiya tape, but obviously comes in a much wider roll. So that's handy for blocking out any larger areas. And of course, I have some time for a cup of coffee as well, which is a necessity. So there's a few other bits that need to be masked. A couple of areas on the interior tub that need to be masked as well. So I can just pop those in. head on over to the spray booth once masked. And I think in this case I'm using XF16 just to lay down a couple of coats over the UMP black. And this time I'm using my Iwata Neo airbrush for the metallic colours. So it's a 0.35 needle, works quite well with acrylics. And then of course the radiator gets sprayed in XF16 as well. So a couple of coats will be laid down just to build up that depth of metallic colour. So the extinguisher bottle, that of course gets painted in red. So this time I'm using a Revell acrylic red. I think it's a gloss red as well. So nice light coats, build up that red colour. Couple of coats of red. And I'm happy with how this fire extinguisher bottle has come out. This case, I just slowly build it up, keep rotating the part. It's got about 3 coats, which over the UMP white primer comes out a nice deep shade of red. Now, some of the chassis components, some of the wishbones, they are in a metallic colour. I could have masked them up and sprayed them, but I thought it's just easier just to do a little bit of brush painting. Because at the end of the day, I actually quite enjoy a little bit of brush painting. So just slowly work my way around the part, using Revell silver for these parts. And a very fine brush from Army Painter. And there we go, a little bit of brush painting done. So once a variety of parts have been detailed on the chassis and interior, we can begin assembly of those components. So just using some CA glue to pop this wishbone setup in place. And a little bit of CA glue to get the radiator in place, which sits at the front of the car. So seats were left in their UMP black. And I'm just using a neutral grey wash just to help pop out the seat pattern details. Now in the real car, I think they were actually a metallic colour, but it would take absolutely ages to go around and basically paint each of those little dots individually. So I've just gone with a wash, which just gives that little bit of contrast between the seat and the pattern that's embedded on the seats themselves. So once that wash is dried, it's a case of just wiping off any excess with some Windsor Newton Sansador, which is a odorless mineral spirits, and a cotton bud. So easy enough to clean up any excess wash. So this kit comes with a set of buckles for the driver's seat. I'm using some ribbon which I've had in the stash. I think it's 2mm ribbon. So it's just a case of trimming off how much you need. I like to use a lighter just to trim off any just to seal any frayed ends. Tend to find that makes it easier to pop it through the slot in the photo etched buckle. As you can see, it slides through perfectly easily. So once I'm kind of happy with the location of where I want it to go, I can wrap that round and pop it into the other side of the buckle. I always like to try and have a little bit of excess on the ribbon, because I do find even if you seal off the ends using a lighter, it is easy to fray them again and you might need to trim them a little bit. So I always try and cut a little bit of overlength And as you can see from the template that comes in the kit, it's definitely longer than it's suggested to be. So that gives me some excess to trim. So exactly the same for the other shoulder harness. That pops through relatively easily as well. And then for the actual buckle part, the end of the ribbon is trimmed a little bit finer as it's a narrower gap. So it's almost trimmed into like a triangular point. And that will pop through, and then I can use some double-sided tape to seal that over, which I'm using some high-tack double-sided tape, which I think I got from Hobbycraft. So it's a little bit wider than the ribbon, but not noticeably so. You can, of course, cut it down in width as well. It can be quite useful. So I'm just going to burnish that down in place. And because I keep my fingernails trimmed, I need to use a scalpel just to lift off the protective part of the tape, and then I can press that over and seal that down. And that's the buckle on the lap belt done. So all those can be put in place with some more double-sided tape. There is a little bit of a frayed end, so just use the lighter to quickly remove any frayed bits of ribbon. And then I've got the driver's seat with its harness in place. So reasonably happy with that. And of course, with that done, I can now assemble a little bit more of the interior, adding the upper part of the wishbones, adding the seat assembly, well, seat part, there's both seats in one part. Pop that into place with some CA glue. Press and hold it in place. And then the dashboard itself has had the individual decals for the dials added. I'm just using a little micro brush just to dot out some of the buttons in white. Basically just highlights them a little bit, gives a little bit of depth and a little bit of character to the dashboard. So I've managed to get a little bit of excess white where I didn't want it, so I'm just using the end of a cotton bud just to clean up any of that excess. So with that done, steering wheel can be added, and then the dash can be put in place on the interior tub and chassis. So overall, that's it for this part. There's a couple of pictures of how that assembly has gone together. Fairly basic, but nonetheless reasonably pleased with how it's come out. So let's head back to me for some final thoughts on how this part has gone. So there we go. That's part 2 of the 24th scale GT40 from Fujimi. So as you can see, the interior tub, reasonably well detailed. It's not going to be very visible once in the windows are quite small, but it's reasonably visible. So yeah, I think it's come out all right. Basic tub itself, it's pretty much painted black with some silver bits. There's not a huge amount to kind of talk about there. Seatbelts went together okay. Nice that the photo etch was included with the kit. Used some ribbon I had in stock for the seatbelt harnesses. And yeah, that all went together, and I think the interior looks pretty decent for what I wanted. So reasonably happy with the progress so far. So yeah, so that's part 2 complete. So next steps on this course, there's still a lot of kind of running gear stuff, wheels, any kind of flat and polish of the body work itself, and then final assembly. So hopefully all that will be covered in part 3, which hopefully won't take as long. I hope to get that done before I go away again, which is in 2 weeks' time. So there'll be this video out, hopefully a bench update, and then part 3 of this video before I go on my next trip. So yeah, so thank you everyone for sitting here listening to my ramblings. Of course, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. For everyone watching, please make sure you like the video, and any comments you want to leave, feel free. So hopefully I'll see you all very, very soon in the next video from the Dan Cave. So thanks for watching. See you all very, very soon. Bye bye.